You all have been working really diligently. It's a joy to behold. So, tonight I'm going to start with a little piece from our mutually favorite poet, Walt Whitman. Another snippet from Song to Myself. I think I could turn and live with animals. They're so placid and self-contained. I stand and look at them sometimes half the day long. They do not sweat and whine about their condition. They do not lie awake in the dark and weep for their sins. Not one is demented with the mania of owning things. Not one is respectable or industrious all over the earth. I actually feel a little bit of yearning when I read over this piece. Kind of wanting to, knowing the possibility of relaxing into my clear, kind of simple animal nature. They do not sweat and whine about their condition. They do not lie awake in the dark and weep for their sins. So, there is a larger truth beyond the busyness that we sometimes get so consumed in. And there's a larger truth beyond the inflation that we feel about this sense of self. I try not to forget that the Buddha was just a flesh and blood person, just like you, like me. He went into homelessness and took up this this life of as ascetic. And he was after something, He was driven, he was driven to know the truth, to understand more deeply how does this nature work? And to find some balanced way to relax into the flow rather than resisting it. And that's really what, the motivation that has driven all of you this week to come and explore. It's the very same motivation that he had. So the Buddha worked, cultivating his heart, kind of sharpening his mind, little by little, kind of peeking under, stripping away the veils that kind of covered over the truth. And in his work, he lighted on three characteristics that we all share. They're common to all of us. You don't get born and not have these. And he believed that understanding them, not just intellectually, but on a visceral level, was the key to freedom. So that's what I want to talk about tonight. And the three characteristics are also known as the three marks of existence. Are anicca, which is impermanence, dukkha, suffering, and anatta, the selfless nature of it all. And in the vernacular, you could sum up the three as life is hard, puts you through changes, but don't take it personally. Okay? So we'll talk about impermanence first because it's a nice gateway into the other ones. And this from Zen Master Dogen. To what shall I liken the world? Moonlight, reflected in dewdrops, shaken from a crane's bill. To what shall I liken the world? Moonlight reflected in dewdrops, shaken from a crane's bill. And we get a little feeling with that simple verse for the fleeting nature of it all. You know, this flash moment after moment. And we don't have to even look in a cursory fashion to see that everything's changing. Seasons come and go, birds migrate, mountains erode. These mountains to the east that we look at, they at one time, believe it or not, were the tallest mountains on this planet. So they've, eroded down. They are not the Andes, not the Himalayas, So life forms, changing, mutating, evolving, becoming extinct. Scientists believe we're in the middle of another mass extinction. That something goes extinct. Three things go extinct every hour. My crude math tells me that's 27,000 extinctions a year. But it's not even the first time this has happened. There's maybe at least 3 other mass extinctions, maybe a 4th. There's some discussion about that, where over 90% of the life forms on Earth just disappeared for one reason or another. Now this time, humankind, we may be exacerbating the current changeover, maybe more than, I should say rather than like a meteorite strike or a polarity shift or volcanic eruptions. But whatever the cause is, nothing remains the same. That's just not part of the deal here. Everything's in motion. Even the continents, you see all those maps of Pangea and everything. Well, Antarctica, which now kind of fell to the bottom of this as we conceive of it, which is totally crazy to conceive of it like that, used to be tropical. They found evidence in the bores and things that there used to be a tropical planet, and then it just kind of migrated to where it was colder, to the pole. So, and this Earth never been in the same place. Never. And it's just this little thing spinning around at 1,000 miles an hour, revolving, and then it's moving around our sun and our little solar system at 70,000 miles an hour. And this whole little group is careening through space at 1,000,000 miles an hour. Just part of our galaxy, we call it the Milky Way. And there are billions of solar systems in our galaxy. And the whole galaxy itself, when you look up on a clear night, is spinning and traveling at 1,000,000 miles an hour. So, we've got star systems being born. It's almost they're seems like they're birthing. You see some of those pictures. Some are dying out, some are colliding. Everything's in flux. Everything's in motion. Can't not find motion. How big is it? Nobody has a clue to that. Now we have this thing called dark matter, where some people are saying, well, about 95% of the matter in the universe is this dark matter. And by the way, we don't know what that is. And then there's dark energy, and that's, some large part of the energy. And by the way, we don't know what that is either. So here we are, in this kind of riding along in this mystery. So that's kind of looking out with the Hubble telescope. And if we look the other direction, it's just as trippy, to looking at the atomic level and subatomic level. The atom, we all study those in elementary school. You got your little nucleus with your proton and your neutron in there, and then you got the electron spinning around. Well, if you blow up the nucleus to the size of a pea, okay, a little green pea, the electron would be careening around a half a mile away, the size of a piece of dust in an atom. there's a lot of space going on there. And then when you look even to the smaller, the subatomic particles, the particles that make up the parts of the atom, they're finding that they change form millions of times in a nanosecond. Okay? And in a closer inspection, a more detailed inspection, it's just energy, vibrating energy. And we're just beginning to learn about this stuff. So, but somehow, the Buddha understood this macro and micro scene really well. You know? He didn't have any expensive hardware. He didn't have an electron microscope. He didn't have the Hubble telescope. But his instrumentation actually was very sensitive. You know, it's organic, close at hand. His senses, his six senses. Applying these six senses to directly experience was all that he needed to start seeing into some of these truths. And just as you're doing, sitting after walking, after sitting after walking, observing the arising and passing of phenomena over and over again. The breath, body sensations, the flood of emotions, the thoughts, the sounds, internal, external, the whole thing. You know, at some point during your meditation practice, those of you that might have been practicing for a while, or even those that may be discovering it this week, there sometimes is that kind of bubbling, tingling sensation that you feel like it's champagne bubbles all through your body. You know, what might that be? S.N. Cuenca, one of my early teachers, and did a lot of study in his form. He says, well, you're just experiencing the coming and going of zillions of subatomic particles, that you're actually feeling them coming into existence and leaving existence through this vibration, this tingling that we feel. Now, Cuenca had this technique, and some of you might have practiced it. I know there were some people on the weekend who practiced it, where all the courses are 10 days. He's dead now. He died a couple of years ago, I guess. All the courses are 10 days. First 3 days you just spend sitting, paying attention to the sensations on your upper lip to your nose. There's no walking meditation. You just sit and pay attention to that for 3 days. And then you do a slow sweep to begin things. And the first time you're led in a sweep, it takes like 2 hours. And then for the next 7 days, you just keep sweeping, and you don't walk, and you sit as long as you can, and you keep sweeping until you can't sweep anymore, and then you keep sweeping. Okay? It's not for everybody, but it's a pretty amazing technique. And eventually, you get so sensitized to the energetic, vibratory nature of the body that maybe you are literally experiencing things at the subatomic level. I don't know. Another teacher of mine called this intensive practice like that activating impermanence. Okay. And I can remember, I don't know, maybe it was 5 years ago now, or it was a 4-month course that I studied with Pao Sayadaw, and he's the absorption master from Burma, and he came to the Forest Refuge. And I knew how difficult it was, because I'd taken a course with him 2 months, a 2-month course the year before. So I went a month early to warm up for the 4 months that he would be there. And so those kind of bubbles and effervescence, he would have us pick out one of them and kind of take a snapshot of it and look into it and determine the color, the taste, what he'd call the nutritive essence, and the sex of one of those bubbles. Okay? Were we all going crazy? Were we imagining this? I still don't know. You know? Or is there something in the power of samadhi and concentration that's like amazing? You know? Is there a limit to it? You know, the stories of Deepama about she was a natural in her samadhi, fall into these really deep states, and it was kind of claimed by her. Is she a Burmese woman or Indian? Bangladesh, okay. Little spit of a woman, but with powerful practice in samadhi. And it was said that her, and I don't know, she died 15 years ago, 20 years ago now, maybe? Her concentration and samadhi was so powerful that she could kind of move back into time and listen to conversations and hear discourses of the Buddha. Lots of stories like this. And if we started talking about the absorption states, they kind of line up with some of the organic things that can happen. I'm not going to go down there. It's too tempting, actually. So there may not be a limit to what can be discovered through strong samadhi. But these are direct experiences. This isn't an intellectual kind of understanding of what impermanence is, anicca. I mean, scientists know all this stuff. They know about the spaciousness in this direction and the vibrating energy in this direction. Does that make them happier people? Generally not. You know, just like everybody else, stuck here, stuck there. But they can really articulate this stuff way better than I could. And I remember, maybe you were there, Jeff or Allie. We did that thing at the observatory where my deal was to talk about the Buddha's cosmology and the 31 planes of existence, and then some scientists talked about the vastness of the universe and how that all lined up. And I actually knew one of the astronomers, and he was really into this expansive mode, but it didn't affect his life. You know, he's just as messed up as everybody, all the rest of us. But considering impermanence, that's where we start, you know. But it's not until you take on the training of actually sitting quietly and directly watching over and over this kind of bubbling, frothing creation that we're in the midst of, feeling it change. Only then does some transformation start to take hold. And this is from Pema. She says, impermanence is the goodness of reality. Impermanence is the goodness of reality. Just as the 4 seasons are in continual flux, winter changing to spring, to summer, to autumn, just as a day becomes night, light becoming dark, becoming light again, in the same way, everything is constantly evolving. Impermanence is the essence of everything. It is babies becoming children, then teenagers, then adults, then old people, and somewhere along the way dropping dead. Impermanence is meeting and parting. It is falling in love and falling out of love. Impermanence is bittersweet, like buying a new shirt and years later finding it as part of a patchwork quilt. People have no respect for impermanence. We take no delight in it. In fact, we despair of it. We regard it as pain, and we resist it. Somehow in the process of trying to deny that things are always changing, we lose our sense of the sacredness of life. We tend to forget that we are part of the natural scheme of things. And the Buddha said, "It is the nature of all things to arise and pass away. Happy are those who can live with this wisdom." It is the nature of all things to arise and pass away. Happy are those who can live with this wisdom. So we look out into the cosmos and we can't find anything that's like standing still, too solid out there, all right? And we look inward in the atomic world, we can't find anything that's standing still or very static at all. And if we, as Pema says, if we regard change as pain, being born into all of this, if we regard change as pain, wow, we're going to have a lot of suffering. And then dukkha is known, the second of the three characteristics. It's got many shades of meaning. It's mostly translated as suffering or stress or unsatisfactoriness. In the Pali Canon, which is where the discourses of the Buddha's 45 years of teaching are compiled, it says that dukkha is in a range from the most intense mental and physical anguish to the subtlest form of being burdened or confined. Burdened or confined. You probably feel that being here. It's also been described as the oppressive nature of experience. Just the oppressive nature of experience. Ajahn Mahaboa, the Thai forest master, explained dukkha as whatever puts a squeeze on the heart. Whatever puts a squeeze on the heart. The commentaries, which were published after the Pali Canon, describe dukkha as that which is hard to bear. It's interesting. In the last retreat that I taught last week, we were sitting around the teachers and we're discussing, well, does fear or that holding is it ever absent? When we look, it's like there's always something that's like a little somewhere in there. It's an interesting inquiry. Is fear, that kind of fear of whatever, is it ever completely absent, or can it always be found in there? I don't know. I think it can be absent for periods of time, but it's certainly, if we look, is there that? And the Buddha many times described his teaching as one thing, and one thing only: suffering and the end of suffering. I know that sounds like two things, but it's, a deep exploration of the aspects and nuances of suffering and the end of suffering. He knew an awful lot through his awakening, but what he talked about 98% of the time was like suffering and the end of suffering. Felt that's most important for us. Not so much the woo-woo of all the cosmologies and the nature of reincarnation, all that stuff. That's only a very small part of what he was interested in talking about. He felt that the understanding of dukkha, suffering, was so important. It's the first noble truth, really, that there is unsatisfactoriness. And he, like us, looked at the kind of instability of all the life around him, and that when you cling to anything, life becomes more of a struggle, stressful, unsatisfactory. And when the Buddha speaks of clinging, he's speaking in that larger sense, which includes the two sides of the coin. one hand, we're trying to keep everything we like just as it is, and on the other hand, we're trying to push away what we don't like. But what this grasping and pushing have in common, if you think about it, there's a stickiness. When we're clinging to something, the mind's stuck on something. It's attached in some way, either in grasping or pushing. When we're attached like that, there's not flow or relaxation in the mind. And the heart tends to be constricted. Somebody once said that suffering's like rope burn. You're trying to hold on to something and it's moving really fast. Ouch. And of course, there's plenty of happiness in life. 1,000 joys, 1,000 sorrows. We get a whole bundle, and most of us actually, with the conditions favorable enough to spend a week like this, we're getting a lot of favorable conditions in our life as compared to others in the world. So, with things being in constant flux, it's like whatever happens, whatever's pleasant or brings us happiness today is probably going to change. But luckily, likewise is true. Whatever is unpleasant and really difficult for us, that's going to change too. There's two sides to the deal. But basing our happiness on external conditions, that's a really iffy proposition. Because really, if you can go out and create an environment where all the conditions in your life are favorable and find a way to keep them that way, you'd be the first. You'd actually be the first. Even people that we look at as gods and goddesses, Hollywood people, stuff like that. Brad Pitt, Angelina Jolie, they got all kinds of troubles too. They got all these kids, they get sick, they get AIDS, they get ill, all this stuff. Nobody escapes this. So in a sense, with nature being this moving target, everything that we perceive through our senses, everything is unstable, moving. Our existence is unreliable. We have a life sentence, we don't know how long it is. The Buddha said, birth is suffering, decay is suffering, death is suffering, not getting what one wants is suffering. And there's even a kernel in suffering every time we're having a really great pleasure, because you can't make it last. You get some pleasure, it fades. Go get some more, it fades. Then you try to stack up one pleasure over another, and they all fade. Then you have to go chase it again. It's hard work, keep it all going. You keep it going for a while, but it's kind of like being on a gerbil wheel. It can be tiring. I remember when I used to be in real estate and get to visit some of the really fabulous estates around Charlottesville. There's some amazing places. And I go preview it hoping that some client would fall out of the sky and buy a $6 million, $10 million place, But I'd be out there and I'd say, oh my God, if I ever lived here, I'd never leave. I'd never want to even go to the store. I just want to stay here. But lo and behold, after a couple of years, you notice, people who own it, who bought it, are dissatisfied. They want something new and shiny to fill up the hole in some way. We don't have the luxury of probably playing it out at that level. But we play it out at our little levels or lesser levels. It's more of a gilded gerbil wheel. They come in different kinds. We might be on ones that are kind of rusted and squeaky, but nonetheless, we're running in it. And if we look at the body in terms of suffering, yikes. Just think all the maintenance we do for this. How much time, if we actually, I don't even want to calculate it. going through a day, how much time is spent in body maintenance? Bathing it, feeding it, cleaning it, and then you've got to find housing, so that's a kind of ongoing thing, you know. Medicine, you know. Sex, if you feel you need that. I mean, lining up all these things. When I look at my contact list, you know, of all the medical personnel that have helped me, it's almost like the Yellow Pages. When I was 20, I had a dentist. That was it. I didn't even know what a general practitioner was, you know. Just had a dentist. Now, you know, yeah, I got a GP. And I had a little murmur in the heart, so it sent me to a heart specialist. And then they do those horrible things where they look for things in your intestines, so a gastroenterologist, you know, and a dermatologist. And I've had skin squamish or whatever growing, blooming on my face that they cut away on a regular basis. And 25 years ago I had bone cancer, you know. So I got, thankfully, I'm not seeing any oncologists anymore, but, and all the injury specialists, all the orthopedic specialists for knees and hands and feet and an osteopath, occupational therapist, you know, get you in a physical therapist, acupuncturist, dental surgeon, even a shaman. I've gone to shamans, you know. The only thing I haven't covered is like a gynecologist, and I guess maybe if I, you know, incline to become trans in the future, who knows what's in my future. And I actually consider myself to be in really good health, you know, given all of that. You know, people talk about old English sports cars. They have a bad reputation because you just have to be a high-class mechanic to even own one. You have to keep tinkering, or it doesn't run. And the older we get, we'll just spend more time with this thing, okay? So the body. And then there's the mind. You've all, you know, you've had your aches and pains in the body here, but the mind, you know, it won't listen. It does what it wants. You know, you tell it, oh, well, just stay with the breath, or we're going to do this loving kindness thing, or whatever. It doesn't follow your directions. It thinks shameless things, you know. And it tends to think about things that make us unhappy. It obsesses, it proliferates from one thing to the next. It really likes to worry and catastrophize. Mm-hmm. That's suffering, for sure. So, suffer the agitation of craving. Craving to stay alive. That's the survival instincts. They're kind of ongoing. They appear really strong at times and back off a little bit. Craving to exist, it's called. Paradoxically, sometimes we have the craving to not exist. We just want to I am so done with this. I wish, I wish it would all go away. And you're almost always craving sense pleasures. So those are the big three. Craving for existence, craving for non-existence, and sense pleasures. And we can't win. They're all impossible to fulfill. It's a hopeless struggle, and that's real suffering. But that's what the Buddha saw in his personal practice, looking at his own experience. We're engaged in this struggle for continued existence, but we're only going to exist for a short time, relatively. And any sense gratification we can grab hold of is momentary. And if we head down the non-existence, path, the self-annihilation, boy, that's a dark alleyway with addictions and harming behaviors and, just wanting to stop the hurt, dull it down. And even when we have nice, loving thoughts, which we sometimes do on retreat, they go up in smoke. They don't stay around. But if we can see clearly that our cravings can't be satisfied, then we're at a spiritual crossroads of trying to navigate our way out of this dilemma. Like, God, I have these cravings and they can't possibly be satisfied. Now what? You know, I think back at the women at the prison. Some of them that are doing long time or life. Some of them, not all of them. There's not some kind of romantic notion, you know, that if you're in there, you kind of open up and you have this. But some of them really have come around to get it. You know, if you're in a cage for many, many years, some start to see the futility in thinking that your happiness is all wrapped up in manipulating external conditions. They get it, that it's actually happiness is available when you have virtually no control over the external conditions. And being in prison is not like orange is the new black or black is the new orange or whatever that is. That's a kind of romanticized version of what it's really like. So they don't have any loopholes. You know? There's not a way out. It's actually, you don't have any loopholes either, but you might think that there are. You know, if you can just get some better conditions, just stack them up a little bit better. Some new possessions or new work position, or that new shiny relationship that looks so good, then the suffering will all stop. It's from Pema again. Whoever got the idea that we could have pleasure without pain? It's promoted rather widely in this world, and we buy it. But pleasure and pain go together. They're inseparable. They can be celebrated. They're ordinary. Birth is painful and delightful, and death is painful and delightful. Everything that ends is also the beginning of something else. Pain is not punishment. Pleasure is not a reward. I always like that one. Pain is not punishment, and pleasure is not a reward. I mean, we can't help it. We want to get rid of our misery just as fast as we can rather than to see what we could learn from it. You know, how it interplays with joy. You know? And so in this practice, the goal isn't so much to cultivate one thing or another. Yeah, we cultivate a kind of kindness to ourselves and kind of exercising our heart in different ways. But the primary thing is just to learn to relate to whatever is happening in, maybe I could use the word proper way. I mean, whatever today's weather is, whatever emotional storm or loving presence arises, it could be anything. You know, can we meet it with acceptance and kindness? And so, if we start to see the truth of dukkha and the futility of looking outside all the time for relief from it, you know, we start to see that the way does. It's inward is the way out. And that first step is just acknowledging the existence of unsatisfactoriness in its various forms. The Hasids had a saying. They acknowledged the truth of suffering in their special, no fooling around way. They said that if God lived on earth, people would come and break out all his windows. So dukkha, whether it's kind of a day that starts with vomit all over the place, or it kind of builds on from there and things just aren't going wrong, if we can just recognize, this is this dukkha thing. Things are not satisfactory. You know? I happen to have the privilege of, in my household, I live with this couple, and they have a 2.5-year-old. And some of you know and met her. And, And they moved in when the baby was in utero, little baby Mary Louise. And it's been a real joy. It's really great joy for me. I don't have to do any of the heavy lifting. I can just play with her, and, you know. But it's amazing to watch the rawness of human nature right there. And it's been a while. My kids are all grown that I've had access to that. At times, there's so much kind of love that pours out of her. She wants to water the plants and feed the birds, and she wants to get the brush and brush the dog, and then she'll kind of collapse onto the dog. I mean, it's just so cute. And other times, it's like The Exorcist is happening. You know, her head doesn't quite spin around. But it's like conditions are unfavorable. I don't like them. And I want them to change. I want them to be different. I can't stand it, you know. And it's like watching, wow, this is raw dukkha. You know, whatever the cause might be, you know. It's just, it's kind of fun. I can't help but laugh at times. Life's hard, even for little ones, you know. And it's not that they're all this, light and happy sweetness. No, that's not what a human being is. It's everything. So, and little by little, we're starting the socialization process, shall we say, and trying to teach her about stuff. But it's going to be a while, you know. First potty training, you know, and we'll go from there. So if you can swallow the pill that everything is impermanent, and you're fighting and wrestling with impermanence is, you know, part of your suffering. You know, basically fighting with Mother Nature. We're going to lose every time. If you can swallow it, like, really, where does that leave you? If you kind of get that part. So, I mean, the you that you feel inside. You know, so now we're to the third aspect. Are you self or selfless? Okay. And we've been beating on this in little ways. And that's a lot of what this practice is. You kind of look at it at this angle, and you look at it in this angle. Well, what's the deal? You know. This is from the Samutta Nikaya, one of the discourses, the books of discourses. So the Buddha says to his students, "What do you think, bhikkhus? Is material form permanent or impermanent?" They all together say, "Impermanent, Venerable Sir." And then he says, "Is that which is impermanent satisfying or unsatisfying?" And they all say, "Unsatisfying, Venerable Sir." Right? See? You were there. And then he said, "Is that which is impermanent, unsatisfying, and subject to change, fit to be regarded thus? This is mine. This is what I am. This is myself." And naturally, "No, Venerable Sir. No." You know? So let's take a look at this third characteristic, this third mark of existence. And everyone has resistance to this. Everyone. You don't get into this practice and not have resistance to this. You know, go, "Oh yeah, I get that." You know, there's always levels of resistance. So you need to just take this with some lightness and kind of adventurous exploration. All right, we'll get real practical. When I drag myself out of bed in the morning, if I have the courage to look in the mirror, which is less and less, there's something looking back at me, you know? And it's not anything of what I saw 30 or 40 years ago. I get that things have changed. I totally get that part. But there's somebody there, you know? In a conventional sense, you know, I'm right here and I'm separate. I'm a really unique blend of physical and psychological characteristics. Nobody's exactly like me. You know, we're all one of a kind, like little snowflakes, you know? That's us, each of us. And that's really kind of cool, you know, that uniqueness. That's beautiful. So it's okay to say, yes to our unique existence. You know? We'll call it our conventional unique existence. But we're very deeply interconnected. We've been talking about that this week. That if you look into the Hua-Yen school of Buddhism, the jeweled net of Indra, an Indian god, okay? And kind of using the metaphor for all of creation is this vast net, and at the crossing of each corner of the net is this beautiful jewel that has a capacity to reflect all the other jewels in the net. You know, it's all interpenetrating. So I'm here in your presence, and you're part of my experience. I'm part of your experience. It really is all interpenetrating. We're affecting each other in all kinds of ways. I mean, separation is a conventional concept, and it's handy. You know, it's convenient to refer to myself as I, as maybe the constellation of activity commonly known as Pat. You know, that's a little tedious. You know. So the other night, Leela talked about the fact that molecules get recirculated. And Will Bryson has a couple paragraphs out of his book, The Short History of Nearly Everything, and it's kind of humorous, so I thought I'd read it. All things are made of atoms. They're everywhere, and they constitute everything. And they are in numbers you really can't conceive. At sea level, at a temperature of 32 degrees Fahrenheit, 1 cubic centimeter of air, a space the size of a sugar cube, will contain 45 billion molecules. A molecule contains a minimum of 2 atoms. And they are in every single cubic centimeter you see around you. Atoms, in short, are very abundant. They're also fantastically durable because they are so long-lived. I'm not even sure they die, but anyway, atoms really get around. Every atom you possess has almost certainly passed through several stars and been part of millions of organisms on its way to becoming you. We are each so atomically numerous and so vigorously recycled at death that a significant number of our atoms, up to 1 billion for each of us, it has been suggested, probably once belonged to Shakespeare. 1 billion each may come from Genghis Khan, Beethoven, and the Buddha, and any other historical figure you can name. The personage has to be historical, as it takes atoms some decades to become thoroughly redistributed. So we are all literal reincarnations. Now, it makes me think about it. And a couple of us had a discussion today talking about the heart a little bit. And they're discovering the kind of interesting aspects of the heart that has a kind of its own intelligence, its own kind of memory in a way. And now that we've done so many heart transplants, and some of the transplant people are like having these kind of memories and proclivities and new likes and dislikes related to the person it came out of. So what's really the deal there? I mean, is there a consciousness or intelligence that's in things as small as subatomic and atomic particles that move around? And I'm always I'm just so curious about, there's such a small percentage of people who really get interested in these practices to the level that they'll commit what you committed to do. It's like, could that possibly be that you got an overload of these kind of contemplative essences that makes you kind of curious about this stuff so that you like stop your life? You know? I don't know. No one knows. Maybe. So, if we grasp onto the conventional view of self, that it's something static, permanent, separate, solid, if we land there as the final word, that's really flying in the face of not only the Buddha, but a lot of other great teachers and mystics that have looked at this idea of self with way more permeability, so to speak. And if we hold it tight like that, well then suffering, becomes more and more probable. We can look at the self, try to get at this, kind of get around the corner at what the self is, maybe by determining what it isn't, okay? And we've got some hidden beliefs about it. Continuity is one of those hidden beliefs. That the person who's sitting there, the you, or the I, or the me, is fundamentally the same person that went to that particular grammar school, learned to ride your bike at a certain age, got the mumps at a certain age, the measles, person listening to this talk, fundamentally the same, Now the strength of that belief, and this is a subconscious, it's happening below the radar system. The strength of that belief is going to affect our resistance to the usual changes in life. Old age, sickness, death, loss, separation, etc. And if we have a real strong belief in the continuity of self, then change is going to be more difficult for us. We're going to get a little more stuck. All right, let's go on. Just hold all this lightly. Be entertained. Think of the possibilities. Don't strain. All right, another unconscious belief. We've also come to believe that there's an observer, okay? Someone who sits apart from our changing body sensations, emotions, thoughts. Sits apart from that general feeling tone that comes with all the phenomena, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. And the Greeks, at least a lot of the wealthy Greeks that had all the slaves out doing their work, they sat around and they thought about these things. Well, how's this, we landed here, what's the deal? What's the self? And so they had the idea of a homunculus, a little person inside us, kind of pulling all the strings, making everything happen, like the wizard behind the curtain. There's a period of time, that's what they believe. Oh yeah, you got a homunculus that's in there doing the stuff. But even if we've been meditating a long time, there is this persistent feeling, felt sense of an observer, right? I mean, it's like something's observing something. We observe, we investigate, and we really can't find that homunculus. There's no form or location where that observer is. So can this observing sense be me if I can't even find it? It's just another inquiry. Check it out. Another unconscious belief we have is that of control, right? That we have some measure of control over the me. Think about it. If you had control over your body, heart, mind to any meaningful degree, you might choose some other options. I know I would. That list of people that keep me going, that wouldn't even be necessary. All those, nothing against the medical profession. I know some of you are here, but it would be great not to need all that support. So we don't have that much significant control over our body, thoughts, and emotions. We can work with them when they come up. We can do all the healthy things, eat right, do yoga, exercise, incline the mind to think a lot of nice thoughts. We can learn to meditate. But we don't have a lot of control. But you might be thinking, okay, I make choices in my life. And there's an argument that can be made that somebody is making these decisions. It's another point of inquiry. So you're not going to get any answers here. So don't even hope for that. So when the Buddha spoke of not self, his point was that these unconscious assumptions that we kind of have held onto about ourselves are really not so true in any entity that we can discover. There's no continuous abiding entity. Just think about it. All our cells changing, etc., so fast. And then we get into the vibrating energy thing. It's like, whoa. No center of experience. No wizard behind the curtain. And we don't have ultimate control over this I. We can't really find a central core. So if believing in one keeps us suffering, what do we do? The answer is kind of simple but not easy, and you're undertaking it this week. The practice that the Buddha taught was, okay, he asks you to sit down and mindfully experience all the comings and goings, the changing body sensations, thoughts, emotions, changing feeling tones that are embedded in every phenomena that arises, the pleasantness in this, the unpleasantness in that, the kind of neutral in that. And if you do this long enough, carefully enough, experiencing the changing flow of phenomena, eventually your grip starts to loosen on this seemingly solid separate self. That's what begins to happen organically as we watch change over and over and feel it. And then you start to relax feel into this life more as a beautiful, miraculous flow. More like a river than a solid object. Solid object that's in opposition and competition with other solid objects. And relaxing into that flow is a very different experience than a life that's dominated by resistance. And this is where suffering starts to significantly diminish. The struggle actually starts to let up a little bit. And as I mentioned before, the major thread and design of these practices, of all of them, is to poke holes in this sense of separate solid self. And in doing so, your resistance to nature starts to lessen. And suffering lessens with it. The less resistance we have to the way things are, the less we suffer. It's all those contemplations in the Satipatthana Sutta. Every contemplation, looking at the breath, the body, emotions, aspects of mind, all of those. We're asked to pay particular attention to the insubstantial nature of all the phenomena. None of them are permanent. So we watch change internally, and then we feel it and watch it externally, over and over until it starts to sink in. The Buddha spoke about us as not being self-existent, a single self-existent entity. He was really, he kept repeating, we're made up of many conditions and components, elements. They happen to come together, and as Leela mentioned, we're all really the spawn of the Big Bang. She didn't quite say it like that, but we are, you know. And the Buddha said that all compounded things are subject to dissolution. All compounded things are subject to dissolution. And you're made up of systems. You have millions of living creatures inside you. All the latest research that's done on the bacteria are friends, colonies of them, billions living in us. You know? Not self-existing. You're the result of everything. You've arisen due to causes and conditions. So many that you can't conceive of them. And you can't control it. It's not yours. This is shaped by nature, and you are nature. So this anatta, this selflessness, brings home the point that we're not separate. We're not apart from this creation. The mystic Kabir says, there is a secret one inside us. The planets and all the galaxies pass through his hands like beads. The secret one inside us. All the planets pass through like beads. You often hear it, you're like the wave in the ocean. Seemingly separate for some moments, but really connected to the vastness of that ocean. And of course we get identified with the wave from time to time. We're humans. You know? We separate out and feel that separation over and over. But the practice really shows us that we are part of this infinite, mysterious nature. So tonight we looked at these three characteristics. You can call them the three portals to freedom, the three marks of existence. So we explore impermanence, anicca, the truth of nature. And it points us to appreciating the preciousness of this creation. Leela talked about that turtle popping up. So we're born. You know. And because of the truth of impermanence, you know that nothing remains the same. And because of that, nothing or anyone can be taken for granted. And that's the appreciation part. That's the kind of cold water, the alertness part, if we conceive of it that way. And exploring stress, the unsatisfactory nature of things, dukkha. By mindfully watching and learning, little by little and incrementally, how you suffer by grasping on. Oh, look at that. You know, you feel all out of sorts and all torqued up, and you notice, oh, look what I'm wanting, or look what I'm not wanting that I have right now. That ultimately, as we keep watching that, ultimately teaches you not to grip so hard. You know, it's that rope burn thing. We start to organically not grip so hard in so many places. Let go into the flow a little more. To relax into the beauty of this creation. And you probably had moments of that this week. To actually learn to enjoy this ride. Kind of surf the wave on occasion. And lastly, exploring the selfless nature of phenomena, as enigmatic and as crazy as that may seem, teaches you not to take yourself so seriously. You know? And maybe even to come to enjoy this magical cascade of everything that's happening within us and outside of us. All these thoughts and emotions coming and going. We can actually come to enjoy them without feeling so desperate without feeling so much ownership of them. And so as you watch over and over this internal phenomena of change rolling on, we can actually have some moments where we're not feeling so driven to defend and promote a self. A self, whatever that is, a me, that's really not continuous, not permanent, not having a core. And when that begins to happen, when we have those moments of spaciousness, the burden gets lighter and lighter. And there's more and more moments and periods of time just kind of kicking back and enjoying the wonder that is this crazy, mysterious life we've landed in. So, finish up with a poem by Hafiz, one of my favorites, called Deepening the Wonder. Death is a favor to us, but our scales have lost their balance. The impermanence of the body should give us great clarity, deepening the wonder in our senses and eyes of this mysterious existence we share and are surely just traveling through. If I were in a tavern tonight, Hafiz would call for drinks, and as the master poured, I would be reminded that all I know of life and myself is that we are just a mid-air flight of golden wine between his pitcher and his cup. If I were in a tavern tonight, I would buy freely for everyone in this world, because our marriage with the cruel beauty of time and space cannot endure very long. Death is a favor to us, but our minds have lost their balance. The miraculous existence and impermanence of form always makes the illumined ones laugh and sing. So let's just sit for a moment.